My daughter-in-law slapped me and called me useless, so I sold the house she lived in. Marianne knelt by her porch garden wrapped in a threadbare blue cardigan, the one Sean had given her last birthday, its sleeves slightly frayed around the cuffs. Her worn gloves, embroidered with property of M, fit snugly as she carefully clipped a wilted rose stem. The crisp buffalo morning air smelled of damp earth and late autumn leaves, a contrast to the turmoil swirling just beyond the garden fence. From the cracked open window of the house's upper floor, raised voices drifted down. Marianne paused, pruning shears midair, as a sharp, familiar voice cut through the calm. She only plants those because she has nothing else going for her. Bethany sneered, loud enough for the neighbor to hear. Marianne's fingers involuntarily clenched the gloves tighter. The words knifed harder than the chill in the air. She glanced up at the second-story porch where Sean sat quietly reading, neither intervening nor meeting Bethany's gaze. The tension was palpable, a rift widening within the walls of the home they all shared. Marianne swallowed, forcing herself to finish trimming the roses. Her hands, comfortable with this ritual, contrasted with the unease creeping into her heart. Behind her, inside the modest hallway, a faded folder lay conspicuously on a narrow wooden table, its worn label reading Deed 183 Carlson Ave. For years, it had been just another file to her family, but today, it seemed to pulse with unspoken promise. No one noticed it much, certainly not Bethany, who viewed the house less as a heritage and more as a battleground for control. As the morning light softened, Marianne straightened up, brushing dirt from her knees. The embroidered gloves reminded her of Sean's belief in her. Despite the coldness she faced upstairs, a faint hope stirred, subtle but persistent, nestled between the rubble of recent insults. She inhaled deeply, the earth's scent grounding her, and for a moment imagined a path through the bitterness, one where she wouldn't be invisible or dismissed. Her gaze lingered on the house's worn front door, its peeling paint a testament to years of shared stories, of husbands and sons, of memories tangled in its creaky floorboards. Marianne felt the weight of history settle on her shoulders. Today's words had ignited a fire she hadn't expected. With quiet determination, she slipped on her gloves and folded them neatly beside the deed folder, a small but steady anchor in a sea of change. Rising, she stepped onto the porch steps, sensing this day was the first whispered crack before a storm. The neighbors' windows glimmered in the distance, unaware of the unfolding quiet war. Marianne's lips pressed together, steady but resolute. Somewhere inside, a plan began to take shape, one that no sharp word or harsh slap could dim. The house, the gloves, the deed, all threads woven together, waiting to be pulled at the right moment. And as the sun broke through clouds overhead, casting light onto her trembling hands, Marianne felt the faint pulse of strength beneath her calm exterior, ready to rise. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and burnt toast, but the warmth inside clashed with the tension sharpening the air. Sean sat at the dinner table, uneasily stirring his coffee, trying to maintain a fragile peace. Marianne glanced down at her hands folded on her lap, the soft, worn fibers of her faded blue cardigan brushing her wrists. Across from her, Bethany's eyes flashed with a mix of impatience and disdain. "So, Mom," Bethany snapped suddenly, slamming her phone on the table, "did you actually pay that electric bill I asked about last week? Because I found it crumpled behind the couch, and if it's overdue, don't expect me to bail you out again." Her voice brokered no argument. The others froze. I thought I paid it," Marianne said gently, voice shaking slightly. She reached out her hand in a quiet offer to calm the moment, but Bethany's response was swift and cruel. "Useless," she spat, swatting Marianne's hand aside. The slap was sharp, ringing in Marianne's ears far beyond its brief contact. Sean's face paled, his eyes flickering with apology, but he said nothing. The silence filled the room like heavy smoke, thick and suffocating. Bethany's lips curled into a cold smile as she leaned back, crossing her arms, eyes locking onto Marianne with unfettered ownership. "You need to stay out of the upstairs. This is our space now. You're living upstairs only because I let you. Don't forget that." The words cut deeper than any physical blow. Marianne's heart clenched as Bethany's tone hardened into a warning. She retreated slowly into the old armchair by the window, fingers nervously clutching the embroidered gloves Sean had gifted last fall. The fabric beneath her touch was a tiny reassurance in the storm. Outside, a faint drizzle brushed the window pane, its rhythmic tapping a muted soundtrack to the unspoken fractures breaking this family apart. Marianne's mind wandered to better days, recalling the soft murmur of laughter that once filled this kitchen. Her gaze softened as she thought of Sean as a boy, learning to ride his bike beyond the porch, Bethany's arrival still months away. A quiet breath escaped her lips as she searched for a crumb of warmth in the memory. The offhand yet pointed remark from Bethany cut through that moment. "By the way, the landlord inspection's next Tuesday. You'll want to make sure everything looks perfect, or I don't know what will happen." The threat wasn't just about property, it was about control. Marianne's fingers flexed around her gloves, the edge of worry sharp and tangible. She knew she'd have just days to fix flaws Bethany would surely magnify. Yet beneath the swirl of humiliation was a flicker of something else. Marianne's steady breath, the familiar softness of fabric on skin. The knowledge that she held the deed to the house somewhere inside those rooms. An invisible power quietly waiting. Even in this moment, she understood strength was not loud or sudden, but drawn from a patient heart. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. Marianne spent the next several days trying to bridge the widening gap between herself and Bethany. Every morning she woke early to tidy the worn hallway carpet, straightening the faded runner that connected their two front doors. She wiped the dust from the railing, hoping small gestures might soften the cold atmosphere that had settled like frost. One afternoon, she baked a cinnamon bread, Bethany's favorite, carefully slicing it into neat pieces and leaving it on the kitchen counter with a note, hoping for a kind word, a sign that things could improve. But Bethany's response was merciless. When Marianne quietly stood nearby during a delivery, Bethany hissed sharply, "Don't deliver upstairs. She gets confused with the bills." The delivery man gave an awkward nod and moved down the stairs without a word to Marianne. Her chest tightened with humiliation, the sting sharper because it was so quietly cruel. A whisper disguised as advice. Sean tried to keep peace, often mumbling about Bethany's heavy workload, his voice shaky when he suggested Marianne join him for errands or errands for a bit of fresh air. But even Sean seemed overwhelmed, avoiding face-to-face confrontation with his wife. His silence felt like a quiet betrayal, and Marianne's hope flickered and dimmed, threatened by exhaustion and loneliness. One evening, Marianne nearly gave up. She sat on the crumpled armchair that had once been her favorite corner, hands clasped tightly in her lap, the heels of her old gloves pressed together in silent prayer. The house felt colder, louder with absence, the laughter, the conversations, replaced by an unbearable silence that pressed on her chest. "Maybe I should just leave," she whispered to herself, thinking of her sister in Rochester, a simpler life, far from this battle she was losing. Then, while cleaning out a cluttered drawer in the hallway, her fingers brushed against an unexpected letter left unopened beneath the others. The seal bore the city's emblem. She pulled it free and unfolded the letter, nerves prickling as she read about the new school that was about to be built on the nearby plot, promising to raise the property values in the neighborhood. This was news to everyone but her. It was a reminder, a tangible, concrete detail that even in this dark time, something unseen was shifting. The letter sparked a cautious hope within Marianne. If the neighborhood was about to change, maybe this house, this home she'd cherished and protected, had value she hadn't dared to acknowledge. The first glimmer of light in a week full of shadows. As she sat there, a reluctant smile traced the corners of her lips. Perhaps this was not the end, but an opportunity waiting in disguise, a reason to hold on a little longer, to keep fighting not just for a house, but for her dignity and place in the family she loved. Marianne stood by the laundry basket, folding the soft cotton shirts she'd just pulled from the dryer. The rhythmic snap of fabric was a small comfort amid the storm gathering inside the house. From the living room, the sharp edge in Bethany's voice sliced through the quiet like a blade. "Sean, you really should look into pushing Mom into assisted living," Bethany said, loud enough that Marianne caught every word. "It's her time, let's be real." The words landed heavier than the slap in the kitchen had, reverberating in Marianne's chest with a slow, burning ache. Her fingers faltered on the cotton shirt, linings creasing. She felt the room tilt, familiar ground becoming unfamiliar under her feet. Outside the window, the relentless rain pounded against the glass, each drop carving away the once bright petals of the rose bush she tended with painstaking care every day. The wind tugged at the branches, bending them until soft petals fell, scattering like fragile memories upon the wet soil. Marianne's eyes traced a single red petal as it drifted to the muddy ground. The image struck her deeply, a delicate thing losing its grip, tossed by forces beyond its control, unnoticed by those who passed by. It was her pride, her place in this family, slowly stripped away in a tide of harsh words and silences. As the rain drummed louder, Marianne's gaze shifted to the hallway table, where a faded folder sat unnoticed. Her fingers reached out, trembling slightly, and she picked it up. On the cover, bold print read, "Deed, 183 Carlson Ave." Beneath the folder, a recent public notice was taped, its words clear and unyielding: right of owner, sale at will, without tenant consent. No one had seen it but her. No one had bothered to read its legal certainty. The power it held, tightly coiled in that thin paper, was her quiet weapon. The weight of it steadied Marianne's shaking hands. In this moment of deepest hurt, she felt something else, an ember of resolve sparking within. Pain was raw, unmistakable, but within that ache was a silent promise that things could change. The house, the deed, the law behind it, they were not just relics of the past. They were keys. She folded her hands over the folder, drawing strength from its well-worn edges. Outside, the wind howled, and petals fell still. But inside Marianne's heart, a new kind of growth was beginning to root, a determination to reclaim not just her home, but her dignity. When dignity finally speaks, who tends to listen in your world? Marianne sat at her kitchen table beneath the soft glow of the old brass lamp. The faded folder marked Deed, 183 Carlson Ave, open in front of her. The edges were worn and creased, but the documents inside were clear. She held the primary ownership of the house. Alongside it lay the letter from the city announcing the upcoming school construction and the associated rise in property values. Her fingers traced the bold print of a clause she had almost overlooked before, a special provision linked to the family trust granting the owner the right to sell at will, without tenant consent. That detail was the linchpin. She picked up her phone and dialed the number she had tucked away weeks ago, the same local real estate agent she had met years back while donating to the community garden. Karen answered with a warm, familiar tone that steadied Marianne's nerves. "Karen, it's Marianne Carlson," she said quietly. "I need some advice about selling a property I own." Karen invited her to the office the next day. The meeting was practical and focused, a welcome contrast to the chaos at home. Karen leafed through the documents, her brow furrowing as she confirmed the clause. "This gives you the legal authority to proceed," she explained. "Bethany might contest, but without a lease granting them long-term rights. You're within your rights to sell." She paused and added, "Just be prepared. If they fight, it could complicate things, and legal fees might pile up." Marianne nodded, appreciating Karen's candor without flinching. She understood the risks. A drawn-out battle would not only be stressful, but might temporarily leave Sean and Bethany without a place. That worry lingered heavily in her chest. Still, Marianne felt a growing resolve. The alternative was living beneath the shadow of Bethany's harshness. That evening she called Sean, her voice gentle but firm. "Sean, I've been reviewing the property documents and the city's notice. It looks like there's a real opportunity here, but I'll need your help navigating it." Sean sighed, overwhelmed but quietly relieved to know Marianne was taking charge. "Mom, I just want everyone to get along," he muttered. "But I can't keep ignoring how she treats you." Their conversation was a fragile thread connecting them in the middle of the unraveling family fabric. Marianne promised to proceed carefully, safeguarding Sean's interests while reclaiming her dignity. In the days following, Marianne organized her plans with quiet determination. The deadline for accepting offers was set for 30 days, aligned with the city's school project timeline, a realistic window to secure a buyer connected with the new development. Each step was grounded in verifiable details, turning her hopes into practical actions. She spent evenings rehearsing her conversations with Bethany and Sean, preparing to present facts, not emotions. The folder became her anchor, each page a shield against the doubt and humiliation that had piled up over months. Despite the looming risk of fracturing the family further, Marianne sensed this moment of uncertainty was the necessary turning point. Holding on to the past had meant staying quiet, shrinking into the background. Now she would stand firmly, not just for herself, but for the quiet strength she knew lived beneath the surface all along. Marianne's hands trembled slightly as she laid the thick envelope on the worn kitchen table. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting gentle patterns across the polished wood. Sean and Bethany sat nearby. Sean shifted nervously in his chair, eyes darting between Marianne and Bethany, whose posture had stiffened, a flicker of apprehension passing over her usually confident expression. Calmly, Marianne opened the envelope and pulled out a crisp legal document. "I wanted to share this with both of you," she began, voice steady despite the fluttering heartbeat inside her chest. "It's the sale agreement for 183 Carlson Avenue. I signed it." Her eyes locked onto Bethany's, watching as the color drained slowly from Bethany's face. Bethany's bravado faltered, replaced by a flush of disbelief. She swallowed hard, glancing down at the papers Marianne had spread across the table, contracts stamped and signed, her own name conspicuously absent. When did you? Bethany struggled, words stumbling out under the weight of reality. Marianne calmly pointed to the clause in the deed folder she'd once feared to touch. "The ownership rights are clear. The property can be sold without tenant consent, thanks to a provision in the family trust. I only discovered it recently. You dismissed the house as ours, but legally, it's mine to decide." Sean's gaze shifted, caught between relief and shock. His fingers found his mother's hand, squeezing it gently for the first time in months. Marianne felt a well of quiet strength rise inside her, steady and assured. For years, she'd been pushed to the margins, but now those margins were expanding, revealing power she had quietly held all along. Bethany's eyes flicked to Sean, searching for support, but Sean only nodded toward Marianne, a silent acknowledgement of his mother's dignity. She wasn't the struggling retiree he'd thought to shield. She was a force grounded by truth and patience. Outside, the muted sounds of the neighborhood hummed beneath the weight of this family reckoning. Marianne's agent had called earlier, confirming the buyer was connected to the school expansion, ensuring the property's future was in reliable hands. The power dynamics shifted. Bethany, used to dominance through intimidation, was now facing the steady, unyielding reality Marianne had wrought. In that quiet kitchen, Marianne's voice softened but rang with conviction. "I hope we can all move forward with respect. I'm not here to fight, but I won't be silenced or pushed aside anymore." Bethany's features twisted briefly in frustration, but a subtle hesitation crept in, a crack in her usual armor hinting at inner conflict. She met Marianne's gaze without the sharpness from before, and for the first time, the hard edge softened just a little. Marianne breathed in the moment, a mix of victory and fragile peace, knowing this wasn't just about a house. It was a realignment of respect, boundaries, and the quiet assertion of worth beneath years of dismissal. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. The morning hum of moving trucks echoed down the street as neighbors peeked through curtains and stepped onto lawns, drawn by the unusual stir in the quiet Buffalo neighborhood. Boxes and furniture filled the driveway, piled neatly beside the worn porch where Marianne had spent countless hours tending tender roses. For Marianne, this day felt like the closing of a long chapter, a chapter marked by the hushed tensions and sharp words that had shadowed her life these past months. Bethany stood at the edge of the driveway, arms crossed, her confident stance now stiff and awkward. She avoided Marianne's eyes, glancing downward as the reality settled around her. The house she had called hers was slipping away by the steady hand of the woman she had tried to belittle. Marianne's gaze met Bethany's for a fleeting moment in that exchange. Marianne saw a flicker of regret, an unspoken acknowledgement that the tables had irrevocably turned. Sean hovered nearby, his face softened by the weight of recent realizations. Stepping forward, he caught Marianne's arm gently. "Mom," he said quietly, voice thick with emotion, "I'm sorry for how things got so bad. You didn't deserve any of it." His words broke a barrier between them and felt like a balm for old wounds. Marianne smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening, not from sorrow but relief. From the sidewalk, Karen, the real estate agent who had quietly guided Marianne through the labyrinth of paperwork and legalities, approached with a warm, respectful nod. "You handled everything with incredible grace," she said softly, glancing at the cluster of neighbors who nodded in agreement. "People might not understand the strength behind quiet dignity, but I sure do." As movers carried the last box inside Marianne's car, she took a deep breath, her senses filled with the mingled sense of fresh earth, the waning autumn air, and hope. She glanced back once more at the weathered house, the place that had been a battleground and a sanctuary alike. This move wasn't about escape, but about reclaiming her story on her own terms. Bethany, chastened and unusually silent, watched as Marianne's confidence reshaped the scene. No longer the dismissive daughter-in-law, but a woman who had quietly summoned justice and earned her rightful place. At that moment, she offered a small nod, a gesture of respect, however reluctant. Marianne felt the weight of years lift from her shoulders, with the sun breaking through clouds above. Actions had consequences indeed, and today the balance was restored with fairness and integrity. Sidewalk conversations began to blossom around her, neighbors sharing smiles and knowing glances, a community tacitly acknowledging the dignity Marianne had preserved. As she locked the car and prepared to follow Sean to her new home, Marianne's heart swelled, not with vengeance, but with gratitude for the journey that had forged her quiet strength into something undeniable. This was not just a move, it was a reclamation of self, a testament that endurance paired with kindness could reshape even the harshest of trials. The morning sun poured warmly over Marianne's new garden patio, lighting the transplanted roses that bloomed in a riot of reds and pinks. The scent of fresh earth mingled with the soft clinking of coffee cups as Marianne sat beside Sean, their hands wrapped around steaming mugs, sharing a rare moment of quiet peace. The faded blue cardigan draped over Marianne's shoulders, the same one Sean had given her years before, felt softer now. Softened not just by fabric, but by time and healing. Marianne watched as a neighbor paused at the fence to admire her blooms, their face breaking into an appreciative smile. She returned the smile, a gentle nod, acknowledging the simple but profound connection the garden symbolized. Growth after hardship, resilience blossoming from pain. "I never thought I'd feel this calm again," Marianne admitted to Sean, her voice low but steady. "Not after all that happened. But standing up for myself, it didn't mean I had to be harsh. It meant remembering that I'm worth more than anyone's cruelty." Sean nodded, a warmth in his eyes that had been missing for too long. "You showed me that strength isn't loud," he said softly. "It's quiet, it's steady." Her gaze drifted to the kitchen door, where her old gloves hung neatly on a worn hook. Embroidered property of N, they were more than just gardening gloves now. They were a silent testament to perseverance, to dignity, to a mother who refused to be invisible. Outside, a realtor walked past, pausing just long enough to meet Marianne's wave. It was a subtle sign of new beginnings, of doors opening rather than closing. The house at Carlson Avenue was no longer a place of conflict, but a stepping stone towards something better. Marianne took a deep breath, the fresh air filling her lungs like a promise. Life had taught her that self-respect wasn't something gifted lightly. It had to be claimed, nurtured like the roses she loved so dearly. And once claimed, it bloomed brilliantly, quietly, refusing to be overlooked. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.